I'm Kathryn Zox, your social worker with a microphone, and you're listening to The Kathryn Zox Show. And joining me today is Nicholas Freudenberg, author of Fighting for New York, Activism for Health and Social Justice Since the 1960s. Imagine New York City without the activists who fought for it, wages stuck at the federal minimum, police stop and frisk without public oversight, no public hospital system, no rent control, no free school lunch, no right to shelter. As Nicholas Freudenberg writes at the opening of his book, Fighting for New York, it would be a less healthy, less just, more polluted, and less safe place to live. The book's central argument is expansive. Health is not just a medical issue. It is shaped by wages, housing, food access, policing, incarceration, and climate. Every fight for a more just city is at its core a fight for health. And history shows those fights can be won. He is Distinguished Professor Emeritus of Public Health at the University of New York School of Public Health. Welcome to the show, Nicholas. Nice to have you on this morning.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good. We finally got you here. And so we're talking about health, and you're saying it's not just a medical issue. It involves, and I'm not going to repeat what I said in the intro. Let's help, but I will. Food access, policing, incarceration, climate, housing, all of those things. And you're optimistic, and you say, and I think you can see that in the intro when I first read it, that things would be much worse. How much worse could they be?
Well, I think part of the reason for my optimism is that things are looking quite bad, that there's really been a cascade of threats to health in New York City and the nation over the last few years. Starting with the COVID pandemic, with the results of climate change, and now the really sharp cuts in public safety net programs like SNAP and Medicaid that put survival and well-being, especially for low-income folks, at risk. But I think it is that sort of stark threat that gives me ground for optimism, because of what I've seen in New York City and elsewhere is that when people feel like their well-being is threatened, their children's health, their family's health, they mobilize and they take action. And we've seen that over the years in New York City. And I think that I'm seeing the beginnings of people saying, we've had enough, and we're going to use the wisdom that we've gathered over the years to fight for better health here in New York and across the country.
So who's actually doing it now?
So I
Who are
think,
the people? Who are the organizations? Yeah, what's happening, and who's really standing up and doing something about all of the,
right. I can
yeah.
point to a few that I think give the examples that you mentioned in New York. We were one of the starting places of the Fight for 15 movement, which raised the minimum wages. And that has spread across the country. And there are both unions and worker organizations organizing low-wage workers to win state-level increases and city-level increases in minimum wages. And there are now millions of workers earning billions of dollars more each year across the United States as a result of that movement. The women's movement, to give another example, has fought very hard against restrictions on access to sexual and reproductive health care. We've achieved some good standards in New York, but things are looking much worse in some other states. And we're hoping that in New York we can set an example that as we move forward with the elections of 26 and 28 will be possible in other parts of the country as well. And the last thing I'll mention is the climate movement, led particularly by both young people and older people who are saying we're not willing to accept a world which has heat waves that threaten our health, cold waves, flooding, forest fires. And so I think we've seen a lot of climate activism in the last few years. So those are a few of the examples that give me grounds for optimism.
Well, I'm usually in New York City, but I'm sitting here in the Adirondacks with an enormous heat wave and acrid smoke coming down from Canada. I think it's
Yeah,
affecting, yeah. I don't know if it's that way in the city today, but it is,
it
yeah,
is
it is.
an air quality alert again.
Yeah. What about infrastructure? Infrastructure in New York City. I mean, what's the impact of that? Because it seems like, and I mean, this is kind of basic, but every day something's falling apart, you know. Uh,
Yes, we had this building in Midtown Manhattan starting to buckle and collapse. And I think that raises the fear that some of the new affordable housing that was being built, this building that collapsed was under reconstruction to add affordable housing, a really good measure. But unfortunately, in the previous administration, some of these efforts to build new affordable housing cut corners, didn't adhere to the regulations for safe housing, and there's even some evidence possibly of corruption, of failure to enforce city standards. So I think we're concerned about the housing infrastructure. New York City is facing a really dire crisis in affordable housing, and we really haven't invested in building new housing for middle class and low income people for a very long time. And that is in part because big real estate developers and landlords have really monopolized the capital that's available for new housing and focused on building housing for wealthy people rather than housing for middle class and poor people. But we've also failed to invest in our mass transit system. And so we have one of the most comprehensive mass transit systems in New York, in the country, but we are seeing more delays, more breakdowns, and we need to see a reinvestment in that. And again, the cuts in mass transit at the federal level imposed by the Trump administration and the Republican majority threaten mass transit not only in New York but around the country. And that is connected to the climate change that we talked about, having alternatives to motor vehicle transportation, having a good mass transit system, an affordable mass transit system, makes it easier for people to get around, to get to work, to get to school, to buy food. So I think infrastructure is a really important piece of the story, and not just in New York City, but in cities and suburban areas around the country where we've been reluctant to make the investments in our future that are needed for this to remain a strong, healthy nation.
Well, you talk about that in your book. Okay, we have to have as you say, an honest accounting of activist failures and missed opportunities, not just the victories, which you talked about a little bit. But okay, so what are specifically some of those missed opportunities? Taking a look at that.
Yes, I think one of the biggest uh, shortcomings is the tendency, the understandable tendency for activist campaigns to get siloed, to focus only on their specific goals. And for example, in housing, I mentioned the big housing crisis in New York City. Unfortunately, the groups that have represented tenants in rental apartments, the groups representing people in public housing, the groups working with homeless people have sometimes focused too narrowly, in my view, on their specific the specific needs of the population they represent. That's good that they're doing that, but I think what we need to move towards is a more comprehensive vision of what would a housing policy look like. And fortunately, I think the Mamdani administration, our new mayor in New York City, is beginning to put the pieces of that together of a more comprehensive view. But we still have a ways to go to bring together the siloed movements around housing, and we could say the same around food and healthcare.
So we need a shared agenda
A
across all
shared
of the,
agenda,
yeah.
and I think a shared vision of a healthy, equitable city.
Another thing that you touch on or that you talk about, which I think is critical, and we don't seem to be able to do that both here in New York and in the United States, but you talk about that every campaign, and this is so important, is you have to ask, how do you define the problem? I mean, I think we don't define our problems, and that is key. And then only then can you engage your community, right? And then choose your tactics. Um, why do we have difficulty defining our problems?
I can think of two reasons. One is health is complex. Many of the problems we're facing, infectious diseases, chronic diseases, people sometimes call them wicked problems. They don't have one cause, they have multiple causes, and there's probably not one thing we can do to fix it. We're, as a country, and maybe optimistic people, hoping to find the magic bullet. But in health, and particularly in health in the 21st century, those magic bullets are not so readily available. We need to do a few things. So I think that's part of it. And the other thing is, I think that there's often a divide between the experts who are investigating the problem and the people who are experiencing the problem. And what I've seen from looking at activism, when those two groups can come together, when the experts who are looking at chronic diseases, asthma, diabetes, are consulting the people who are experiencing the problem, they're more likely to come up with workable solutions than when either of those groups works on its own. So those are two of my thoughts about why it's sometimes difficult to define the problem.
And I
The,
think we also, maybe you can talk to us about this, but we get into this all or nothing thing. This is a right wing answer, this is a left wing answer, and then it just and this is touching, I guess, on what you just said, not being able to see the nuances of the problem and then responding to it, whatever it is.
yes, and I think uh, there is a tendency, even among activists, or maybe especially among activists, to believe that either we pursue incremental reforms, mostly working within the system, or we pursue transformative changes that require, a radical restructuring. And what I've learned from looking at activism over the years is the most effective groups take a both and instead of an either or approach. And an example of a group that does that is Metro New York Healthcare for All, which has been around for 30 years. And that group fights for transformative changes like Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All at the national level, and in New York, a state universal health care program that would make New York the first state in the country to take that approach. The American people support universal health care, but there are a lot of special interests who oppose it. And I think what Metro New York Healthcare does is they work on both. As well as fighting for these big transformative changes, they each year go to Albany to fight for continued and expanded funding for Medicaid, for providing access to health care for immigrant populations. Because if the big immigrant population in New York City can't find health care, that's a threat to their well being, but also to everyone else's well being. So, health is a collective good, and it makes sense to look at it for everybody. So, those are two of the things I think that could help us to resolve some of these dilemmas. Look for combining transformative and incremental changes, and look for bringing together all the groups that are affected by a problem.
Well, Bernie Sanders, you mentioned Bernie Sanders. He talks a lot about identity politics and get away from that. That's not helpful. That's not defining our problems in the way, as I think, in the way that you've been discussing it, or it's discussed in your book. So, what about identity politics? How does that get in the way for all of us?
Well, I think I have two thoughts on that. First, I think, again, successful groups, I'm thinking of We Act for Environmental Justice, a West Harlem group fighting against environmental pollution in Harlem, precipitated by the movement of a sewage treatment plant from a mostly white community to mostly African American Central Harlem. They opposed this plan, but they didn't take a narrow approach to identity. They said this is a problem that affects African Americans in Harlem. It affects women and families. It affects environmentalists. It affects people living in other communities. And so they tried to develop what some people have called an intersectional approach, bringing together people with different identities. And from what I've seen, that works much better. So I think it's not identity versus not identity, but putting forth identities that can bring constituencies together to advance their shared collective interest rather than their solo interest. Because I think the people in power, those with the huge wealth that has been concentrated in the last few years, have learned very skillfully to divide groups, to divide different racial, ethnic groups, genders, classes. And they have found that that allows them to maintain their power and control. So I think this intersectional approach provides a good answer to that, bringing people together, the middle class and working class, and the very poor, to look for our collective interests as opposed to the interests of the 1%, highlighted by Occupy Wall Street.
And this is probably going to be my last question because we only have a couple minutes left. But what about the whole intergenerational um, approach, I guess, to some of these problems? I mean, you have Mamdani, who's 34 years old, and that's a huge difference between some of the people who are running the government here in the city and in the country, who are 84 years old. Um, how does that work? Or I mean, and I think a lot of and I'm the older generation, the baby boomers. So is it time to let go? And is it time to let the younger generation take over? Yeah.
Well, I think we're very encouraged in New York City by the recent election of a bunch of young folks who bring a new voice and a new perspective to political change and understand that people want to see improvements in their daily living conditions, not simply promises and not simply the holding out of a sometimes idealistic past that I think we've seen in both the right and the left. But I think the model that I look to that is most promising is the climate change movement, which has mobilized young people uh, in the Sunrise Movement to say that we're not going to be the generation that sees our future and our children's future decimated because uh, older folks aren't willing to take change. But we also see the movements of older people around climate change saying, we messed up and we owe it to you. And now we have the time to volunteer and to mobilize people, and we have less to lose. So I think in climate change, you see older people and younger people and those in between coming together to say, we want a world that's better for ourselves, but also our children and grandchildren. So that's the
Oh,
hope.
good. That's our jumping off point, I guess, for positive change. Well, okay, so now we have a minute left. So give us a website or other platforms to go to for more information. And I'm assuming we can get the book online everywhere and bookstores.
Yes, the book is published by Columbia University Press, and their website, you can buy it. It's also available at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and other bookstores. Uh, People can go to the uh, CUNY School of Public Health website. If you Google that, you'll find it. And we recently had a forum where activists talked about this book. And if you go to the website, you'll be able to find a link to that forum to get more information about some of the fights that are going on in New York and elsewhere.
Thank you so much for being on the show today. Obviously, lots of information, lots of good information. I'm going to read the title of the book again is Fighting for New York: Activism for Health and Social Justice Since the 1960s. It, thank you.
Thank you, Kathryn. I really enjoyed this.
Thank
I'm Kathryn Zox, your social worker with a microphone, and you're listening to The Kathryn Zox Show.
Joining me today is Roger Love, and we're going to be talking about new stuttering techniques and other communication issues. Roger Love is widely recognized for coaching some of the world's biggest stars, helping them transform their voices for award-winning films, recording projects, concert tours, and high-stakes public appearances. Yet his most impactful work may be taking place far beyond Hollywood. His upcoming documentary, Find Your Voice, tells the inspiring story of a man who spent most of his life believing his severe stutter could never improve until achieving remarkable progress through Roger's innovative vocal methods. As millions of Americans face speech disorders, communication anxiety, and the emotional challenges that often accompany them, he presents a powerful new perspective on the relationship between voice, confidence, identity, and authentic self-expression. His Academy Award-winning film coaching credits include Walk the Line, Crazy Heart, and A Star is Born. Welcome to the show, Roger.
Good morning, Kathryn.
I'm afraid I don't want to stutter. I'm intimidated. You are actually, as I've been reading about it, and actually ChatGPT AI said you are the best, actually, the best. Yeah.
There must be some way for me to rig that system, but it's nice when it says that.
Okay, so we're not going to just talk about people with stuttering problems. Yes, that is I'm calling it a disability, but the whole issue of communication and how we speak and what that does to our psyche and our presentation, anxiety, speech fluency, all of that. So, do you want to, I mean, obviously your new film is about stuttering, so maybe we should take that. Is that an extreme problem in terms of difficulty communicating with difficulty communicating?
Absolutely. But let's start at the very beginning. And that is the idea that the number one fear in America and most other places in the world is still speaking in public. And when people are afraid to speak in public, they are worried about their voice. They are worried about the things that they say. They are worried about being judged. So if we, the public, don't even like our own voices when we hear it back on recording machines, and we're afraid of other people feeling the same way, you could see how easily it is to be worried about speaking, to be worried about the sounds that you make if you don't like your own voices. So when people speak and they're afraid of being judged harshly, and understanding this, people make value judgments about you based on the way that you sound in about 8 seconds. So you meet someone and you say, hello, good morning. And in hello, good morning, they've already made these assumptions of whether they like you, whether you're intelligent, whether they want to speak more. So most people aren't even realizing that they can change their voices for the better if they want to, that we're not born with a voice. We're born with an instrument like any other instrument, and we need to learn how to play it. So I work with people, doctors and lawyers and actors and public speakers, but I say everyone's a public speaker because the second you open your mouth, you're speaking and they're your public, even if it's only one person. So I show people that they can take the voice they have and they can give it a makeover, and they can create a voice that works better for them, their lives, their profession, and their personal life.
Well, what do you think is happening right now? Because I'm noticing, and I'm not picking on them, but young people seem to not be speaking as a group as well as, say, the baby boomers, and we go down to Gen X, Gen Z, millennials. They're more isolated. They don't have the opportunity necessarily to talk a lot of people and gain confidence. Um, it seems to me there's a whole generational shift in the way people speak, not a good one.
Well, that started a long time ago, actually. Once people started emailing and texting, they, as humans, we started speaking less. And now look at what AI can do. We can talk into AI, into the phone for a minute or less. It can memorize our voice. It can sound like us. It can write in many cases better, more fluent than the way people write. So it can write what we want to say. It can say what we want to say in our voice. So AI and the whole technology is giving people the out of not speaking so much. It used to be you'd go in the break room at work and people would be talking. Now everybody's on their phone. Everybody's looking for Instagram and for other social media to entertain them. So we're not speaking as much as humans. But that's why I fight so hard to use your voice, to use what is most human about you, your ability to showcase emotion, authenticity. So we've got to show young people by example that parents are talking more, that adults are talking more, and encourage young people to actually speak instead of just texting and using AI to do it.
Are we comparing ourselves to AI? Something, I listen to a lot. I do listen to the news AI, and I listen to Audible books, etc. Do you think that it gets a little, can make us more anxious? You listen to this AI voice which sounds perfect or may sound perfect. Not all of them do, but you're sort of competing with this machine.
I think we should start competing with this machine because when you realize that even though AI can match our voices, can imitate our voices, it doesn't have the same emotional sounds. It doesn't know when to go up in melody, when to get louder or softer. It doesn't know when to have more sounds of gratitude or hope or empathy. So we should be listening to AI and we should say, that's not emotional enough. That's not human enough, and we can beat it. We should realize we're a zillion times better speakers than AI will ever be.
Is there a difference between, I mean, you have coached the best celebrities, actors, as you said, lawyers, physicians. What about just the general public? Is it the same process when you are when you are coaching someone? Um, as it say that I didn't read, I don't think I read the names of the famous people, Bradley Cooper, one of them, but just the man on the street or the woman on the street. Same process as you're coaching them to be better speakers?
Same process. What I learned early on in my career was that singing really affected people's brains. When you listen to music, you are moved emotional. It releases chemicals into the brain that makes you happy. And so what I realized was that I could make people's speaking voices more musical. They could sing, they could have more melody, more emotion, and then I could affect the same emotional responses as if I was singing to someone and moving them emotionally, but I'm only just speaking to someone and moving emotionally. So I use all of the science, all of the sounds, all of the emotion of music, and I help everyone, average, wonderful people, mothers and fathers, and I help them all put the music into their voice, which puts the emotion into their voice so that whether they're talking to their kids or whether they're talking to their coworkers, the conversations that are happening are more real, they're more authentic, they're more emotional, and they're more engaging.
What about politicians? Can they win an election based on how they speak? Because the old saying, I guess you would call it, it's not what you say, it's how you say it.
Yes. And the thing is that some politicians are very good at influencing emotions. So I always say right now that the two most popular sounds in the world, including in the political world, are the sounds of anger and the sounds of depression. And the anger is very prevalent in the political world. So a speaker who is good at inciting anger moves people, influences people, because people are just angry at so many things. So, not for the better, but a lot of politicians are very good at using their voices to incite anger. I would rather politicians and all human beings be better to use their voices to influence people to be more caring, to be more loving, to be more kind, to be less separative, and more inclusive.
What about sort of getting back to the children and the younger generation? Because we do, don't we? We have to start very young. We have to, and I think a lot of the programs that have promoted um, positive communications you're talking about get outed in terms of the schools, acting, theater, debate clubs, those kinds of things.
Yeah, but a lot of those are still just word-based systems. What you have to understand is, and by the way, you don't have to start when you're young. It's great if you start when you're young, but you can change your voice to be incredible at any age. I took Louise Hay, who was one of the most famous publishing giants and public speakers and thought leaders of the years. And Louise Hay was in her 80s when she came to me, and she wanted to have a voice like she was in the 30s. So I gave her a voice that sounded young and vibrant. And then for the rest of her life, she sounded young and powerful and influential. But the bottom line is, we have to understand the difference of how communication is actually taught and learned in the world because it's flawed. We're taught that to be a great communicator, we need to learn the right words. If we had the right words to say, we could convince this person to hire us. We could convince this person to go on a date with us. We could convince anybody if we had the right words. But that's not how communication works. When I speak to you, the first part of the brain that my sound goes into is called the amygdala. And the language of the amygdala is emotion, not logic. So if I say to you, I love chocolate, I hate chocolate, I love strawberries, I hate strawberries, you don't have any idea. The brain doesn't know how I feel about chocolate or strawberries, but it's the sounds that the amygdala is listening for, the emotions. So if I say, I love chocolate, I love strawberries, I don't like carrots, then the amygdala says this is emotional. So I'm going to pass that information on to the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that then processes what you said. So actually, communication needs to be learned on what sounds you should have and then what words you should attach to the sounds. And it's not taught that way and it's not learned that way. And that has to change.
Okay, now we don't have too much time left, so I do want to get into this stuttering. And of course, when we talk about stuttering, we think of like Joe Biden. Wasn't he a stutterer who became president of the United States?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, when I was a little kid, I was watching a late night television show, and something happened that actually changed my future life. A comedian got up and he told jokes and he stuttered. And I'd never heard anybody like that. And the audience was laughing, but not at him. They were laughing with him. And then after the comedy routine, he sang. And when he sang, there was no stutter at all. He sang beautifully. He was actually a famous country singer. And I stored that in my memory. And years later, when I became a voice coach and people started coming to me for not just learning how to sing or learning how to speak better, but they started coming with problems like stuttering, I remembered that as a kid. And I reverse engineered a way to take stutterers and teach them to sing and create solid airflow because truth, when you stutter, no matter how severely you do, you don't stutter when you sing. So I created a system that teaches any stutterer how to create that solid airflow like singing. And I realized I could eliminate stuttering. So over the years, I've helped thousands and thousands of people eliminate their stuttering by changing the way that air flows out of their mouths and the way that the words are attached on that air. And it takes almost no time. I can have dramatic results in 30 minutes with someone who stuttered their entire life.
30 minutes, they can come to you, be coached for 30 minutes, walk out of your office, and that's it.
That's it. That's it. They've heard themselves speak beautifully without stuttering. That's it. They've learned or they understand how they have to work on their breathing. And if they practice what I give them, they will be stutter free.
What about the anxiety? Because I mean, which you actually talked about in the very beginning, like people just automatically get anxious when they get in a situation where they have to speak and they've never spoken before. Yes, maybe they're comfortable in their everyday life or, whatever their routine is, but when something different happens, that anxiety just envelops them and they lose the ability to communicate
Of
effectively.
course.
Yeah.
Of course, you have to realize this. Like I said, if people are just afraid anyways of speaking in public because they're afraid of being judged, multiply that times a zillion with someone that has a speech problem like a lisp or a stutter or spasmodic dysphonia, which is absolutely terrible for them. So imagine how that shakes their confidence because they try to get the sounds out, but the body fights those sounds coming out. But they don't have to. It's sometimes as simple as just changing the airflow. What I'm really excited about was I created a new documentary called Find Your Voice, and it just debuted at the Chinese Theater here in Los Angeles as part of the Dances with Films Festival, which is the biggest film festival in Los Angeles for the last 30 years. And this film literally shows the public that I can take someone who'd stuttered their whole life and then just in minutes reverse that and make them a voice that they love. And so I'm trying to get the message out to the public that they don't have to hate their own voices. They don't have to dislike their own voices. They don't have to use their voice as their escape route of, oh, I'll just not speak, or I don't have any confidence. I'm not a good speaker. Mother Nature hates me. So, I really I want to tell people that again, that they're not born with the voice they have. They're born with an instrument, and it, like grandma left you a piano. You decide you're going to put it in the living room, but it either becomes a frame holder or you learn how to play music. And voice is like that. We should all learn to play the most incredible instrument that Mother Nature gave everyone who can speak. And we just have to learn how to fix it, how to train it so that we love it. And when we open up our mouths, people will love it.
Roger, what's the most challenging experience that you've had with anyone? I don't know if you can name names or just the process or the experience.
I'll tell you what's challenging. I remember a mother brought her 17-year-old son to me who had stuttered his whole life. And in one session, I showed him exactly how not to stutter. He sounded great. The mother was crying. The kid was crying. I was crying. It was so beautiful. It's one of the most amazing things when you transform somebody's voice and you just see them completely become new people. And he went to school the next day, and his friends made fun of him because he sounded different. And they were like, hey, who do you think you are? Who are you trying to be? A radio announcer? Who are you trying to be? You don't sound like you anymore. And they made fun of him because he didn't stutter. And you know what? 2 weeks later, the mom called me and said, there's nothing I can do. His friends all made fun of him because he sounded different. So one of the worst stories, and so many times happens, is that people are afraid to change their voice because of all the people around them that don't understand that sometimes change is amazing and it's for the better. And those are the challenging stories. The people that are afraid to change because they're afraid of how people might perceive them as differently. You know, it's the story of the group of young kids who are all seniors in high school, and they all apply to colleges, and one person gets into a super Ivy League school and the other person gets into a junior college, and the person who gets into the super Ivy League school is afraid to tell their friends that they got into a super Ivy League school because they think that they'll be so disappointed where they got, instead of being encouraged by, wow, my friend just got into super Ivy League, and be happy for one another. So voice is the same way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so change is difficult, I think, for all of us, whether it has to do with speech or not. And I guess that's where we're stuck. That's what you're saying, or we
Yeah,
can
and
be stuck.
so what I'm saying is, why don't we just learn how to have beautiful voices, incredible voices, authentic voices, influential voices, and then why don't we bounce those off of people and realize that the way we create the life we want is one sound at a time, one conversation at a time, which leads to one relationship at a time. And it is the relationships that we create with ourselves and other people that give us that life that we all want to have.
That's obviously worked for you. And could you just give us you've given us some, but give us more insight into how you were able to, I guess, recognize this in the beginning. You said, you saw this did you say he was a comedian?
Yeah, it was a comedian.
Yeah.
His name was Mel Tillis. But the bottom line is how I was able to recognize all of this was I was a singer. I still am a singer. And I sang. And I realized that every time I sang, it made me happy. So if I was depressed, I sang and suddenly I was happy. And I didn't understand the science. And then later on, I became a singing voice coach. And when I was 17 years old, I was already the voice coach of the Beach Boys and the Jacksons, Earth, Wind and Fire, and groups like Chicago. And I taught singing for 17 years and got really good at it. And then speakers started coming to me. So I had already had a lifetime of teaching singing from low to high on pitch with vibrato and singing emotionally, so that when I started working with speakers, not just celebrities, anyone who speaks, I had almost 20 years of background of already teaching people how to make the sounds that would move millions of people. And then I just took my techniques and adapted them into techniques for the speaking voice, for the general public.
So your confidence came from your experience as a voice teacher, as singing, I guess. And
Exactly right.
yeah, and then you were able to translate that. Was there any point in your career, we only have a couple minutes left, where it didn't work for you and you had to overcome whatever the issues were so that you could go on to do what you're doing?
Sometimes when when you show up at work and you walk in and there's like some of the most famous people in the world, some of the most incredible people in the world, some of the most powerful people in the world. I mean, when I was 16 years old, when I taught my first lesson, it was Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys. It's difficult to summon enough confidence when at any age, but when you're sitting in front of Brian Wilson and you're supposed to be his teacher, you can imagine that requires a learned skill set. So I used voice to build my own confidence at every point in my life when I needed more confidence. I used my voice to lead me to that place. And that's a great lesson for everyone.
16 years old and you were in that position. Should I ask you that?
True.
How, yeah.
How? Because my voice teacher was the most famous voice teacher in the world, and he had all those stars, everybody from Barbara Streisand to Stevie Wonder. And he went away to Canada to teach a master class, and he didn't have anyone else to teach. And I maybe looked a little older, and he said, "Hey, Roger, why don't you come over after school on Monday and teach my students?" And I said, "Okay." And I just went for it. And like I said, on Monday, singer after singer after singer, from Luther Vandross to the good guys from Chicago to Earth, Wind and Fire to Brian Wilson, they were there. And I started the lesson each time with something I felt was a good place to start. So, Ryan, tell me what problems you're having with your voice. And he said, "Well, Roger, you know what? I sing really well the first night of concert, but the second night I'm already hoarse." Okay, I thought, so amazing. I knew how to play the vocal exercises. So I said, let's work on the exercises and let's see what I find. 6 months later, all of his students and myself, we realized that I actually had an ability to listen to people and make suggestions to make it better. So he brought me in as a junior partner in that organization at 16 and a half. So I continued to go to school and college and did everything I wanted to do. But in every free waking moment, I was a voice coach as well, loving it.
Well, I'm loving your story. Now I know why you are, and I'm going to repeat it again, recognized as one of the world's leading authorities on voice. Great. All right, so tell us where we can find you on the web, on other, platforms to hear, to listen, to uh,
To
find
get more
out.
advice
People get more
and
advice, find
and
out what
free
you're doing.
advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I've moved you because you have a stuttering problem, I want you to go to speak.voiceplace.com and you can learn more about why you're stuttering and that it's an airflow problem. And for all things voice, you should just go to my Instagram page, which is the official Roger Love. On Instagram, there's hundreds and hundreds of videos you can watch for free and learn about all things from fillers like too many likes to nasality to having a breathy voice to losing your voice to sounding old, and start watching the videos, and you could learn more about how it's possible to work with me, get my programs. All of my programs to fix all vocal problems are so cost effective. It'll be like, don't go to Starbucks for a couple of weeks and you can get a program that'll absolutely make your voice sound beautiful and influential. So go to speak.voiceplace.com or go to the official Roger Love on Instagram and start learning and start realizing that you can have an amazing voice that you will love and other people will love listening to you. And that's the fastest way to the confidence you need.
Well, you sound great, and it also sounds like you're having a lot of fun at the same time, right? So, Roger Love, thanks so much for being on the show today. We learned a lot. We want to learn more from you.
Thank you, Kathryn. Have a beautiful rest of the week.
Thank you.
I'm Kathryn Zox, your social worker with a microphone, and you've been listening to The Kathryn Zox Show.